My name is Dennis Gill with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is 20 August 2022. I have the pleasure of speaking with Virgil
Rabine.
Rabine.
Yeah.
Rabine. Make sure I get that right. Virgil Rabine. So if you could just give us a little bit of background about yourself. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Okay, I was born in Austin, Minnesota, actually. That was where the hospital was. My little town of Elkton was probably about 150 people. And we had just come off the farm. My dad had a nervous breakdown, and they sold the farm. And we went on to take over the gas station in Elkton. And I spent the rest of my growing up years there until I got out of high school.
Okay.
And then I went to Austin Junior College, about 13 miles away. And I went there for 2 years and I was able to get an AA there, and then went up to Mankato's Teachers College for 1 quarter. And that was about the time the Cuban Missile Crisis was boiling. And a friend of mine says his cousin was the interviewer up in Minneapolis for pilots.
Okay.
And since I didn't have a degree, I'd have to go in as a cadet. And so I took all the tests and exams and everything, passed them. And so that worked out pretty well for me. And then next year we went down to Pensacola, Florida. That's where I started my career with the Navy.
So you were in the Navy?
Yes, and had 18 months with the program there as a cadet. So we started out in Pensacola, then I went up to up to Mississippi, and flew the T-2 Buckeye up there for till I got through that program, and then they sent me down to Pensacola again to do the guns and carrier quals. And after that, I went out to Texas, and they put me in the S2 Grumman tracker as a cadet pilot there, because they needed multi-engine pilots, obviously. And I got my wings there. I went through VT-29, which is the navigation squadron, which we had to qualify at first before they let us get our ensign and get our wings, because a lot of people, once they finished the flying program, they kind of just said, well, I'm not going to mess too much with the navigation program. So we had to pass that first to get our wings and our commission.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why did you select the Navy?
Well, I tried the academy first, and I didn't have the background for it. And I had a pterygium in one of the eyes, so that had to be removed, and a couple other reasons. And they made me 5th alternate to get in the academy, and of course that didn't work out. So I kind of shotgunned all the representatives and Congress people up in Minneapolis, and I finally got the 5th alternate, but that didn't work out, so I just joined the Navy.
Okay.
And that worked out pretty well for me. Yeah.
Did you have any other relatives or family members that were military?
My uncle, Don Rabine, was in World War II, and he was a ADR, I guess at the time. He was a recip engine mechanic, and basically he was working on F-4 Corsairs, and the propellers was his main thing. And so he was the only other person that was from that area that was in the military. All the rest of us were farmers, and they kind of got exemptions from World War II.
Right.
My dad at the time had his own farm, so that worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
And for him anyway. Yeah. He probably could not have passed the physical anyway, so we just...
What aircraft did you end up flying?
Well, I ended up flying the P-5M Martin Marlin, which was a seaplane. That was my first duty squadron.
And what is the mission of that aircraft?
That aircraft was anti-submarine warfare. What else? Pretty much we had Jezebel, Julie, and MAD and radar. And we also we could drop any kind of bomb that they had that was available. And so we gemmed up in North Island, California. That's where we joined Squadron 50. VP 31 was the RAG Squadron, Replacement Air Group. And after I got through that, then they put me out on VP 50. And immediately I went to Sangley Point in the Philippines. And at the time, we didn't fly airplanes back and forth across the Pacific anymore because we used to lose so many en route and got them scattered all across. So what we do is the squadrons that are over there change with our squadrons, and they come back and take our airplanes.
Okay.
So that helped a little bit that way. But you know, everybody always said we gave them junk, and they always say we gave you junk. You know?
Right.
It worked out fine, and we stayed there. I had 2 or 3 cruises with VP 50, and the first 2 were with the seaplanes, and we flew the clock tracks out of Sangley Point. We go out to Vietnam, fly back, and we were basically monitoring shipping, sea shipping, and keeping track of sea lanes. And we'd look at all the Paracel Islands and the other islands to see what was going on there.
Could you land and take off from a carrier with that airplane?
No, it was too large. It was strictly a seaplane. It was a 110-foot wingspan and twin engine. Had the R3350 engines on it, were rated up to 3,750 horsepower apiece. So we used JATO bottles for takeoff at max gross weight.
Okay.
And after 3 deployments in the seaplane, then they decided to give us P3s, and we got the oldest P3s that the squadrons had at the time, and we flew took one more mission over to Sangley Point in the P3s. Of course, they were a little bit faster and much smoother airplane to fly, air conditioned and everything.
Right.
You didn't have to have the window open and held it open as a juice can to get fresh air.
Right.
And so it was a step up for us. But the seaplanes were probably really fun to fly because they were strictly seaplanes. They had to land on the water, take off in the water, and they'd pull you out of the water, hose you down, and park the airplane. And it's a very large airplane.
Yeah.
They were derated down to 85,000 pounds when we were flying them, and I don't know what they were before that time, but it was a big airplane.
When you were flying reconnaissance missions, correct?
Pretty much reconnaissance missions, yes. And we did get to go in Vietnam and fly out of Cam Bay with the seaplanes for a while.
Okay.
And we worked with 3 different seaplane tenders out of Cam Bay. And we would fly what they called market time patrol. We'd take off out of Cam Bay, fly up to Haiphong, and then go back down to the southern part of Vietnam and go over to Cambodia, flying around it, just doing the same thing again, reconnaissance. So that worked out pretty well. We had a couple airplanes that were shot up flying in South Vietnam, but we never lost an airplane that way. We lost a few other ways, but not that way.
How many missions did you fly in country in Vietnam?
Well, let's see now. I've had 2 different squadrons. I was there with another squadron, VP 47. So probably about 760.
Really?
Yeah.
Anything that stands out about any of those missions?
Yeah, it does. We were flying, we used to take off at 7 o'clock at night and fly until 7 o'clock the next morning. And there was a Phantom of the Tonkin Gulf they used to talk about. And one night they said, the Phantom of the Tonkin Gulf is out there, we want you to track him. So they gave us 2 A4s, one on each wing, and we followed this Phantom until we got into Haiphong Harbor, and then it disappeared. So we broke it off and came back and landed at Cam Bay. That was probably the most exciting ones as far as the night missions go.
What does that mean, the Phantom?
I'm not sure what it was, but it was something it was something that was either electronically designed or built by either the North Vietnamese or China,
Okay.
or even the Soviets. And it would look like it was a surface contact. And so they'd send an airplane after it, and we'd chase it, and it would disappear. So we never did see it. And And I talked to John Kenny earlier this morning. You know, he was on EC 121s, and sometimes I kind of wonder if they weren't the guys that were doing it. But other than that, wasn't that exciting. You know, that one airplane we did get shot up. They had to take us out of the water because it had quite a few holes in the belly and in the tail. But they didn't learn how to lead the airplane, even as slow as it was. I mean, we flew at 150 knots, and most of the shells would land up in the tail, right, and in the hull. And so when we landed, we had wooden plugs. We'd pound in the holes and then taxi up to the back of the Currituck, and they'd hoist all the water, and then they'd repair the plane on the ship. Okay. The crew one took one shell that went up through the belly, went up through the floor, and it went up through the seat of the navigation seat and burnt the guy's tail. So he got his Purple Heart from that, and he ended up being the chief of naval operations as he got older. His name was Larry Garrett. Okay. It was kind of interesting. That's probably the most we took. We had one airplane run aground on a submerged reef, and it kind of tore the bottom out of the airplane, and had another one that was just had a bad landing, and it crashed on landing, but nobody was hurt on that one. And Crew 13 went out on a rocket run practicing, and one of the rockets blew up and took the wing off the airplane. And it was kind of a Crew 13 people on board, and it was just all that. And many people died on that one. So that's the biggest ones we had for those airplanes.
When your plane got shot up, did you know it, or was this something you realized after you guys had gotten back?
Well, we knew we were getting shot, yeah, and we saw the shooters, and we shot back, but we had the 4 guns mounted on the doors. We had 2 doors front, 2 doors aft, and we had guns mounted. And so we took it back to them, and it probably was stupid because, I mean, what are you going to do with machine guns? You know, you can't do a lot of damage, and we weren't really supposed to. And we did this because they said, you know, guys, when they shoot at you, you've been running. Why don't you shoot back? So we did, and they changed their mind quickly after that. So we stopped shooting back.
Right. So you're flying pretty low.
Yeah, we're flying well low as we can go, 200 feet usually. Getting down to read the ship's call signs, and if at night we had to do Morse code with them if they responded. If they didn't, we'd have to light them up with a searchlight and get their names off the ships that way.
What's the crew on that aircraft?
We had a crew of 12 usually. We had a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, which is the 3rd pilot, and a tactical coordinator, and then 3 or 4 enlisted on the flight deck, and then we had a coordinates man and some guys down at the bottom to help manage the airplane. Right. They had a large APS 80 radar in the nose, and then we had Doppler radars in the tail of the airplane for navigation.
Okay. Are you living? Where are you living while you're flying these missions? Are you in Vietnam or flying out of the Philippines?
At this time, I was single and I was flying out of the Philippines. Okay. So I was staying at the BOQ. Okay. When we were flying out of the on the clock tracks, and then when we were in Vietnam, we'd stay on the ship. We'd have to stay on the ship, and we'd keep a minimum crew on the airplane in case it broke free from anchorage, because we had to anchor out. There was no place to put the seaplanes except that anchor. So we kept 4 people there all the time.
Okay. So you would land on the water and then taxi up to a ship?
To a buoy. They had placed buoys in the Cameron Bay there, and then we'd tie up to those, and then wait until somebody came and rescued us and take us to the ship.
I got you.
And the people that stayed on board, of course, had to eat, and they'd bring out meals to the crew that stayed on board.
Right. So
we try and alternate the lowliest pilots, of course, the navigator and the second pilot. We'd take turns staying on the airplane.
Right.
And aircraft commander got to go and stay on the ship.
Gotcha.
And I was pretty junior at that time, so I was pretty much on the airplane most of the time.
So you lived on the airplane?
I lived on the airplane, yes.
Wow. And your missions are about 12 hours, you said?
Usually 12 hours. Yeah.
How often are you flying?
Well, just about every other day, yeah. So it's 12 on, 12 off, you know.
Right.
Yeah, we were busy. Kept us busy.
Plus living on the airplane.
Plus living on the airplane, yeah.
Well, I can't imagine that. And how long are you there in Vietnam?
Off and on. Well, the first time I was in Vietnam was probably 66. And then the last time when I was with the P3s, I think they got out of there in 79. No, wait a minute, that's not right. 69.
69.
Yeah. And I came back to training command and flew 1 year in training command. And then I went to Monterey postgraduate school for an undergraduate degree. And then right up from there I went aboard a ship and spent the rest of my Vietnam on the Coral Sea as air traffic controller and a COD pilot.
Okay. I'm going to go back and we'll touch on your being an air traffic controller, but it intrigues me that you lived on this airplane.
Yeah.
Are you sleeping? Where are you sleeping?
Well, they have bunks on the airplane.
Okay.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 bunks on it, and a lot of the guys just take chairs and sleep up on top of their airplane at night. Cause,
on top of it, okay.
yeah, it's cooler.
So do you go to the ship for showers and
Yeah.
chow and come back to the airplane? Is that how it works?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And sometimes they forget about us out there, and one time, we got fired a flare. We got attention that way.
Right. Come get us.
Come get us. Yeah, we need to have a change here.
Right. Wow, that's interesting. So you become an air traffic controller on a ship.
Yes. That's. I thought my order said I was going to be on the flight deck,
Okay.
but they said no, that's not what it is. It's going to be air traffic control, and you're going to be one of the watch officers. So we're going to send you down to Brunswick, Georgia, to air traffic control school.
And how long is that?
It was forever. It was probably 4 months, and I'd just gotten married, so I taught my wife along with me, and we had 1 child when we were in Monterey, and so he went down to Georgia with us, and he was just a little guy, a little tyke, and we stayed at a I guess you'd call it a mobile home. And the cows would be sticking their heads in the morning, and wake us up because we were right on the edge of Brunswick there. It was a pretty neat little place. So after I got my training there, we also got to fly the airplanes there to do the patterns for the radar controllers to operate. So they had S2s. So we flew the S2s pattern work, flying around and around and around, making and doing the carrier traffic control practice for the guys that will be bringing us aboard.
Okay.
So that worked out pretty well.
Yeah. What kind of things are you learning as an air traffic controller?
Well, for a ship, you learn that you have to keep them in tight. You want to get somebody on deck every 30 seconds, if you can, IFR or VFR, conditions. So that's what we practice, and working traffic in. If somebody had a bolter and had to go around and they were short on fuel, they'd have to be reworked back in and fit in with the other airplanes that were on final.
Okay.
So you'd have to practice that before you were ever qualified to go out to the ship and do that work. And as a watch officer, you had to do exactly the same as the guys that would be flying the airplanes. So you'd learn a lot about air traffic control and keeping it tight.
Yeah. I imagine that's stressful.
Very high
Charging.
stressful,
Yeah.
yes.
How long did you do that?
Well, I went aboard the Coral Sea, and so I was there 3.5 years, so that full time. So that was, again, had other duties also, as also bridge watch stander and I had some other collateral duties, like I had chief's mess I had to audit, and the officers' mess I had to audit, and so it kept us busy.
Yeah.
And the bridge watch team was very busy. So it was usually 4 hours at a time, and then you'd go away for 8 hours, you come back and do another 4 hours. So between that and managing the air traffic control, it was busy.
Right. Any incidents that stand out during your time?
Well, we had one incident where an F4 went off the cat, and he was heading for the water, and the guy says, you know, pull up, pull up, pull up, eject, and he ejected, and he made it out. And then the airplane went all the way up, went all the way over the back, and was starting to come back down and towards the tail end of the carrier, but it crashed just short of the fantail, so it missed the aircraft carrier.
So the crew ejects and the airplane
kept on flying, yes.
Gotcha. That's typical.
The F4 was a very heavy airplane for that ship, and we had to use max steam for the USS Coral Sea because it was an older boat.
Right.
It had superheated steam that was really pushing the limits.
Yeah. Were you flying sorties into Vietnam from the Coral Sea?
Oh yes, yeah, they was flying into North Vietnam a lot. Yeah, and if another carrier didn't make it out to relieve you, then you had to stay around longer, and so we spent a lot of extra months.
What's the tempo? Are you flying every single day?
Yes.
24 hours a day, that kind of thing?
No, they usually try to break it off and give you a little bit of break. It depends on whether they're launching an alpha strike or if they're just launching routine sorties. It'd usually be an hour and a half sorties because the F4s run out of gas as soon as they get airborne.
Right.
They have to tank, and they go up to cap station and fly overhead, circling overhead, and then the attack squadrons would take off and fly in and do their runs in North Vietnam. And then when they come back, then they retank the F4s to get them aboard also. And then we'd have to rotate the ship, move south, and relocate all the aircraft on the ship so you can do out for another launch. And then they had the alpha strikes is what they would launch, everything off the ship that they had. And that would be only a one-time shot at night or daytime. So,
what's life like on an aircraft carrier?
it's hectic, yeah. My stateroom was way in the back, and my at-duty station was up on the forward bridge, which is right underneath the bow. So if we had general quarters, I'd have to make it all the way from my bunk in the back room all the way up to the bow of the ship in 5 minutes before they locked everything down. And once they started locking it down, you couldn't go anywhere. You'd be stuck where you're at. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, so you had to be ready to go.
Yep, had to be ready to go, yep.
What kind of recreation was there on a carrier? What do you do when you're not working?
We have to be in port when we're not working.
So you're always working?
You're always working, yeah. Yeah, they really didn't have any recreation. Yep. We'd go into Subic Bay and do some ships fitting there,
Right.
and everybody would have, as many as they could get off the ship would have freedom, get to go off and go in town and have a good time. So. And it was the same way on the aircraft carrier, the old seaplanes, when we'd go into, once in a while we'd get to go other places, like we'd go up to Buckner Bay up in Okinawa and get to visit up there for a while. And so it wasn't too bad. It was okay.
Yeah.
Once I got married, then my wife I had to bring her overseas because her mom and dad lived in the Philippines. He was the defense attaché at the time. Okay. And I met her in the Philippines. That's where we got married. So when it came back for the ship duty, I brought her back to the Philippines so she could stay with her family there.
Right.
So that worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
And her dad was, like I said, defense attaché. He flew the DC-3 for the embassy, and So if I really needed a ride back to Manila, he'd come over and pick me up. And I'd offer the ride to anybody else that I wanted to go along, of course, and they could ride over too.
Right.
Yeah. So that worked out really, really well for us.
How did you keep in communication with your family while you were deployed on the ship?
Well, they had HF radios. You could talk to them with that.
Okay.
And that was pretty much how you did it. And sometimes you didn't talk to anybody. They just knew you were going to be gone, and that was it.
What would you say the most rewarding part of your career was, or the most rewarding time?
I think probably being able to come back home and see my family. You know,
Right.
we were separated an awful lot, and when we left Monterey after I left school there, came back to after the air traffic control school, and went right on the ship, and the ship was deployed, and we were gone just about all the time. So once in a while we got to come back and visit, but not very much. That's why we brought her out there.
Right. Did you ever have any incidents when you were back in the United States, like so many of the veterans had, because you served in Vietnam, because you were in the military?
Well, I'm from Minnesota originally. That's where I was born and raised. So yeah, when I went back to visit my mom in the hospital, I wore my uniform, which probably might have been a mistake. Yeah, somebody saw me coming in the hospital. They said, look, there's a fly in here. Let's swat him, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Minnesota was sort of on the liberal side and anti-war. So yeah, we did see a lot of that. And even when we were in Salisbury, Maryland, after I left the Navy and joined NASA, it's a pretty liberal town too.
Yeah. So, did you retire from the Navy, or?
I retired in 1985. Yes.
85.
Yeah, that had 22 years in.
Okay.
They had messed up my retirement date, so they gave me an extra 2 years, which gave me a 55% retirement instead of the 50%. So that worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
So I joined NASA just as soon as I left the Navy. I mean, actually before I left the Navy, they had I was a safety officer at Oceana Naval Base in Virginia Beach. And one day, a King Air landed from NASA, and the pilot that was flying it says, "You don't happen to have a NATOPS manual for the C-12, do you?" I says, "I'll have one right here. You can have it, you know." And then he was walking out the door. I says, "Oh, by the way, if you ever have an opening up at NASA, let me know, and I'll see if I may maybe come up and fly for you guys, you know." Sure enough, about a year later, I got a call. I was still in the Navy, and I asked my commanding officer, I said, "I've got an offer to go fly for NASA." He said, "Okay, help yourself, go for it." So that worked out really well.
So what did you do for NASA? You flew, what did you fly?
I flew, King Air for sure, and then P-3. We had the original P-3 that was built for the Navy. It was a YP-3A. It was a Lockheed Electric that had been converted to the P-3. And after everybody was done with that airplane, they gave it to NASA. So we flew that airplane. They also had a Lockheed Electra there, an L-188. So I was able to fly that, which was a very nice airplane, very smooth. It had the different propellers on it than the P-3. The P-3 had the ham standard propellers, and the Lockheed had I can't remember the name of it exactly, but it was a very smooth propeller. And of course the cockpit was further ahead than the P-3 because they chopped the front end of the P-3 off a little bit to put the bomb bay in it.
Right.
And so for the weight and balance, they shortened up the airplane. And you're much closer to the propellers than you were in the Electra. So my first mission out of NASA was to go to Anchorage, Alaska, and then up to Fairbanks in the Electra. And I flew as a co-pilot, and the captain was a NASA pilot, Kurt Allen, ex-Navy pilot also. So we flew out of Fairbanks for about a month, flying up into Anchorage, up into Barrow, Alaska, and up to the North Pole. And we had lasers on board, and what we were doing, measuring the ice caps. And then at the time, there were submarines going underneath the ice, and they were measuring the ice from the bottom, and the aircraft were measuring it from the top, so we get the total thickness of the ice. And surprisingly enough, there was always leads open. You could always see open water all the way up to the North Pole.
So you flew, basically flying experiments.
Yes.
Your entire. How long did you spend with NASA?
I spent 14 years with them. I stayed with them until 1999.
Okay.
And then I came up here to Georgetown and flew with Harvey Patrick Foundation here at Georgetown. And they were making the long-range tanks for the 737s on this field here. And then we got a job of building AWACS birds for one of the Muslim countries. In, I think it was, the one right across from the Morocco, I believe it's Morocco, yeah. And so we had 1900s that we were converting to AWACS birds here. And when that contract ran out, then one of their basic airplanes they had there was a 310, and I bought that and started up a small company called Atlantic Global Research. And I was flying NASA, excuse me, NASA LiDAR on that airplane also. So that was a pretty good mission for about 6 years. That worked out well.
What would you say you're the most? What would you say that, or how your military career, specifically your wartime experience, has affected your life? Looking back on it.
Well, I had a pretty easy wartime experience. I was not down on the ground, you know, getting shot at and shot up, and they pretty well looked out for us, you know. And when I was on the ship, of course, I was flying the C-1, which is a COD, and if the admirals needed to go to Hong Kong, I'd be the pilot taking them there. And that was fun. But as far as the actual, it was really, that war was something else, because it was, you know, it went on forever, and it just seemed like we were kind of wasting our time there. But I can't really say that, but you know, it was, and a lot of people were getting hurt, and so it kind of affected me that way. It really did. But again, since I wasn't down on the ground and taking bullets, so it probably wasn't as no PTSD with it at all. So.
Let's fast forward 100 years and somebody watches this interview. What message would you like them to know about you and your service?
Well, it went fast. It really went fast. And if I could do it all over again, I'd do the same thing probably. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was good flying. It was good camaraderie. You know, the people you worked with, and flew with, enlisted and officers alike, were all very, 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 very good people, and enjoyed being with them. Yeah. Yep.
Anything else you'd like to document?
Like
anything else that maybe I didn't ask, or?
Well, my wife would love to have you say, "How about my spouses? What they go through? They go through hell."
Sure. Well, tell about that.
My wife, she was immediately, when I left on the ship, she had 2 boys, went up to Vallejo, California, lived by herself up there. And the oldest boy, he was a tricycle rider, so one day she got a call from the policeman and said, "We got this guy riding a tricycle down Highway 80. Does he belong to you?" And she said, "Yeah, that's my son." He's the one now that's flying for NASA. And
wow.
Yeah, he grew up to be kind of like his dad. He's been the last July he spent up in Greenland, and in March he spent in Greenland. And one time on a P3, and another time on a NASA C5 or a Grumman 5. So they fly real high altitude LiDAR, and so he's been with them for quite a while. We got the job down at Wallops for him he was wasting time going as a hotel manager over in Ocean City, and said finally got him hooked up with NASA down there, so he was able to get a job with them, and he's been with them ever since. So that worked out well.
Yeah.
My wife, I brought her to the Eastern Shore in 1985, and she'd go out in the backyard and cry because she's a city girl, and we were living in pretty much in the country. Yeah. So we've been in that same house for since '85, and so she just liked to be recognized as part of the family and the military family.
You're absolutely right. Spouses don't get the credit.
No, they don't,
because they have to hold down the fort.
If I wear my Vietnam hat and they say, "Well, thank you for your service," and she gets a little miffed, you know. So how about me?
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So I got her license plate for a car that says Navy wife, U.S. Navy on it, but that's not enough.
They hold down the fort, and then you come back, and
right.
It's got to be tough for them as well, because now.
Yeah. What are you doing here?
Yeah.
We're doing fine without you.
You're right. Well, on behalf of the Americans of Wartime Experience, I want to thank you, sir, for sitting down and talking to us.
Yeah.
Thank you and your wife for the service to this great country.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
You're right.